There was less food to go around with 3 ponies at the table, up from 2. You'd think there'd be more conversation to balance things out, but the only ones who did all the talking were Bright Mac and Bright Mac's wife. Granny had a plate with a tall stack of apple fritter flapjacks, slathered in parmaline and topped with a half-melted pat of butter. The stack blocked Pear Butter, seated opposite her from the table from view, but a voice came through loud and clear, as did her conversation with Mac.
Oh, the bayou's great, Buttercup. Now, I know it don't sound like much.
It really don't sound like much. Pear Butter's voice had a fluttery quality that made her every word sound like a song. Easy enough to see why Mac fell for her. I mean, ain't there monsters living round there? Seems like you risk bumping into something nasty just stepping outside your door. We live next to the Everfree Forest, Granny muttered into her flapjacks. How many monsters you bump into your life, Pear? She bit off a hunk of flapjack, chewing slowly. Mac was seated to Granny's left. She could see his expression change as she spoke out. He laughed. It sounded as nervous as his face looked.
Yeah, but besides that, the swamp folk keep the place safe. They're tough folk. They gotta be living where they are. Good customers, too. They go crazy for our apple pies. They'll have the place nice and safe by the time me and my wagon roll up.
There was a pause. Then Pear, sounding a mite anxious, said, So you're not gonna get gobbled up by a monster, then? Mac's laugh was gentler this time.
Never in a million years, Buttercup, I promise.
I believe you, really. The conversation lulled for a moment, as she chewed and swallowed some of her breakfast. I still wish I was coming with.
I do too, but,
Pear picked up his thought. Yeah, I know. But I still wish you didn't have to go alone, even if I can't come along. Why can't, She hesitated. Why can't your ma go with? Granny's teeth ground together so hard she swore she chipped a crown. Mac, big talkative palook that he was, fumbled around for his words before he found an answer to his wife's question.
We used to go together, back when I was a colt and she was showing me the ropes of the business. But that was when we had other folks working the farm. Nowadays it's just us, so someone's gotta stay behind, right?
It was certainly a better answer than Granny's joints give out easier than they used to, and she can't stand the trip no more. Not a bad save. Pear Butter replied, But I am here, ain't I? I can hold down the fort while y'all are out. It wasn't a good enough save either. You know, it ain't polite talking about other ponies like they ain't in the room, Granny chided. Taught you better than that, Bright Macintosh.
Sorry, Ma. You know, I really ought to be heading out. Long road ahead and all that.
Yeah. Pear Butter's voice sounded weaker. Sorry you didn't get to finish your breakfast. Mac's gaze turned toward his bride, and he watched her, thoughtful for a slight moment, and then with a glint in his eye he said,
Oh, Buttercup.
He moved in a single motion, too quick for Granny's eyes. Bright Mac opened his jaw impossibly wide and whipped out his tongue, snatching the entire stack of flapjacks off his plate and sliding them into his mouth like a frog. He chewed, swallowed, and grinned. Pear Butter laughed. Bright Macintosh! That is disgusting! No, don't come and kiss me. You got pancake mouth. You big... Her protest didn't stop Bright Mac from kissing her, and she didn't try to stop him either. Thankfully, the pancakes on Granny's plate blocked her view. She rolled her eyes anyway. The legs of Pear Butter's chair scraped against the floorboards as she rose from the table. At least let me see you're off, 'kay?
Shoot, wouldn't dream of saying no. See you in a few days, Ma.
Don't get your hiney munched on, boy. Mac lingered at his mother's side and leaned into her ear, dropping his voice to a whisper.
And don't do too much at once, you hear?
Granny pulled away, glaring at him. I'll take things real slow, son. The newlyweds trotted past Granny, Pear nudging Mac's flank with her own as they went. You gotta teach me to open my mouth like that someday, you hear?
You sure? It ain't easy to learn. Gonna be years before you master it, too.
I got time, Pear Butter said, and you got the rest of your life to teach me. Mac chuckled, his voice growing distant.
Yeah, I guess I do at that.
With the youngsters gone, Granny ate alone in the kitchen. stewing and chewing in silence. Yep, my boy's spending the rest of his life cleave to the fruit of Grand Pear's loins. Ain't that a grand notion? Her teeth scraped together awkwardly, making her wince. Think I chipped that crown after all. She ate alone until Pear Butter returned. Mac's off on his way, she said as she took up her seat at the table again. Granny swallowed a bite and grunted a half-hearted response. She'd eaten enough of her flapjacks by then that she could see Pear Butter on the other side of the table. If she troubled to look up, not that there was any reason to, she knew what Mac's wife looked like already. Hey, Granny. Just wondering. Pear Butter's voice was small and meek. Think I could grab some caramel syrup for these flapjacks? Don't got any, Granny replied curtly. We don't? Granny looked up, narrowing her eyes at Pear. The filly gave a reason to look up after all. We don't. Oh. Pear Butter bit her lip. What about the stuff you dip apples in? When you make them caramel apples? I mean, like on Nightmare Night. I thought maybe I could put those on my flapjacks. That's for caramel apples, not flapjacks. Granny's hoof found the parmesan jar and she gave it a shove, sliding it across the table toward Pear Butter. We got parmesan flapjacks. The jar skidded to a stop by Pear Butter's plate. The younger mare looked down at it uncertainly. Granny's eyes twitched. Their problem? Just that, Pear Butter combed a hoof through the bushy mass of curls she called a mane, blushing. I always preferred caramel syrup on my flapjacks. Well, these are apple fritter flapjacks. Eat them with parmesan or eat them dry. Granny tucked back into her own breakfast, muttering between bites. Caramel syrup on apple fritter flapjacks? Oh, they're ridiculous. Despite herself, Granny did glance back up at Pear Butter. She'd gone back to eating, staring listlessly at Bright Mac's empty seat while she dug into her flapjacks. The parmesan jar was untouched. The strain of the day's work sent Granny to bed early that night, after a long soak in the bath to soothe her muscles. Work didn't go away just because she was tired, though. Josie rose early the next morning, hoping to get a head start on another day of apple bucking. Sunrise was a dull red smear in the distance when she rolled out of bed, and the light in Mac's room, the room he now shared with his wife, was out. Taking care not to wake her, Granny crept downstairs, fixed herself a bowl of cold oats, and was out the door and into the orchard under the fading watch of the mare and the moon. Her body ached, despite the soak and the extra rest, and the pre-dawn chill wasn't helping her creaky joints any. It vexed her something awful. In her girlhood, she could work her legs from dawn to dusk and not feel a thing in the morning. But old age was creeping up on her, and she found herself shuffling more and more of the work onto Bright Mac as the years ran on. Of course, he was out of town and wouldn't be back for days, meaning she needed to pick up the slack if Sweet Apple Acres was going to keep up the harvest. Part of her was tempted to roast out Pear Butter and put her to work in the orchard. It was a very, very small part, though, and one Granny wouldn't listen to. Granny didn't mind Pear Butter pitching in with the household chores or yard work, but the orchards were heart and soul of the Sweet Apple Acres, and Pear Butter was... A shudder ripped through Granny. She's Grandpa's daughter. She's Bright Mac's wife, and Grandpa's daughter. Maybe a day would come when those two notions would knock up against each other in her brain, but it wasn't going to be that day, and it wasn't going to be any time soon. Granny ate her words the moment she saw those peach-colored hindquarters sticking out from the canopy of the tallest tree in the apple orchard. Pear Butter? Pear Butter had propped a ladder up against the trunk and climbed to the top to get the apples in the highest branch. A partially filled bucket rested at the base among the roots. At the sound of Granny's voice, though, she climbed back down, holding an apple by its stem in her mouth. She spat the apple into the bucket and smiled at Granny. Morning! The filly chirped, a stray leaf poking out from between her front teeth. Sorry if I woke you this morning. I was up pretty early and I couldn't get back to sleep, so I thought I'd come out here and get a head start on picking apples. A head start? Granny shook her head. On picking my apples? In my orchard? Yeah? Pear seemed to notice the leaf in her teeth then, because her tongue darted out and licked it free. You don't mind, do ya? Granny remained stock still and silent as she stared witheringly at Pear Butter. Guess that answers that. Pear shrank back, her smile fading. I'm sorry, I didn't think it would be a problem.
Did any pony say you could work the orchard?
Pear Butter pawed at the earth bashfully. I mean, Bright Mac and I...
He ain't here, and it ain't his decision. Besides, not only you ain't doing a job you weren't asked to do, you ain't doing it right.
Granny sucked her teeth.
Apples ain't pears. They ain't delicate. You don't pick 'em one by one, you buck the tree and you shake 'em loose all at once.
I tried that, actually, Pear Butter mumbled. She stepped aside and gestured to the trunk as a series of vague, half-moon gouges in the bark. I, don't really got a knack for it, though. Couldn't get any loose. Mac's always talking about showing me how it's done.
He ain't here,
Granny repeated testily. No, he ain't. Pear took a deep breath and held it for a moment. But, I'd still like to help out, if you'd have me. Not just with the chores, but the big stuff too, like apple picking. Maybe you could show me how to buck. Granny opened her mouth to respond, but the request had cut off guard. She didn't have a response in mind. She stared dumbly at Mac's wife. A flicker of warmth spiraled into life in the pit of her stomach. Then golden sunlight crested the horizon, and a thin slat fell on Pear Butter's cutie mark, at the jar that gave the girl her name. The flicker of warmth was guttered out.
I got a whole day's work ahead of me, and I can't be holding your hoof while I'm at it. Bright Mac can teach you when he comes home.
She brushed past Mac's wife to reach the tree and pull the ladder down. Pear Butter didn't quit, however. But wouldn't the work go faster if you have an extra set of hoofs? I mean, just showing me how it's done can't set you back by that much, can't it? And I want to help out. I swear I want to help out. You looked so tired when you went to bed last night that... Granny's frigid glare silenced Pear Butter.
You listen here, young filly. I don't need your help. I don't need any pony's help to clear my orchard. Any apple gal worth her salt lick could buck every apple from every tree in this here orchard on her lonesome. And don't you dare say otherwise.
With that, Granny reared up and cracked the tree trunk hard with both hind hoofs. Apples rained down from above, piling into the buckets till they spilled over the rim.
That's how it's done.
Granny eased her hind hoofs back to the ground, clenching her jaw hard to fight back the pain that ran through her right hip.
Now get. I don't care what you do with today, just get.
And Pear Butter did just that, shouldering the ladder and setting back off to the house without another word. As soon as she was gone, Granny slumped over and rubbed her aching hip.
Yep,
she said to herself with a thin and brittle voice.
You still got it, Smith.
She moved her leg experimentally and felt a cracking sensation in her balls and joints.
Maybe not for much longer, though.
The work that day didn't go any easier. Every tree that Granny bucked gave up its yield with a single blow. That was a point of pride for her, but every kick she landed sent ripples of pain through her joints and up her spine and deep, deep into her muscles. And every tree bucked wore her down just a little bit more. Before she cleared even a fraction of the orchard, she was spent for the morning, trudging back toward the farmhouse for a lunch break that came several hours earlier than it should have. The mouth-watering scent of cinnamon greeted Granny as she stepped into her home. Indeed, her mouth did water, even as her stomach twisted with irrational annoyance.
I swear to Celestia, Pear Butter?
She made her way into the kitchen and threw open the door, scowling. As she expected, she found Pear Butter, hunched over the newfangled gas stove, stirring a pot with a wooden spoon.
What are you doing now?
Pear stiffened at Granny's voice, spat the spoon onto the countertop and backed away on unsteady hoofs. Sorry for the mess. I thought I'd surprise you with lunch. But you'd back earlier than I thought you'd be. Granny's eyes narrowed. Pear was sweating, probably from the heat of the stove, but Granny liked to imagine that her gaze just made the girl that nervous. Not that I'm implying you got, winded or worn out from working in the orchard and had to knock off or nothing. She trailed off as Granny pushed past her to inspect the stove. There was a pan beside the pot, its surface coated with a thin brown syrup. Shriveled sticks of cinnamon and tiny black clusters that must have been cloves were scattered among the syrup like driftwood. Inside the pot were 4 peeled apples, yellowish spheres bobbing around in gently bubbling water.
For crying out loud.
Granny growled. She poked one of the apples with the tip of a filthy hoof and watched the dirt smear out into the water.
Perfectly good apples, and you went and ruined it. What in tarnation are you even doing here?
She'd been muttering to herself more than to Pear Butter. The girl, knowing no better, answered anyway. I'm poaching them. Poaching the apples. Granny turned and looked flatly at Pear.
You don't poach apples, girl.
Pear Butter crossed her hoofs, nervously rubbing her fetlocks together. Why not? Granny's eyes widened.
Say that again.
Why not? Why don't you poach apples? She was talking back, but she didn't sound all that insolent, more curious than anything. Is there a reason you don't? Am I doing something wrong? Tell me if I am. I want to do right by you, Granny.
You don't poach apples.
Granny took a step forward.
You don't poach apples. You bake 'em, you dry 'em, you slice 'em up and put 'em in pies, you mash 'em up and make apple butter, you dip 'em in caramel, you do all kinds of things with 'em, but you don't poach 'em.
Pear Butter looked her squarely in the eye. You aren't saying why not.
But it ain't done, girl. It just ain't done. Generations and generations of apples have cooked apples all kinds of different ways, but they don't ever poach them. And we ain't about to start doing it. That's reason enough, ain't it? That should be reason enough for you, shouldn't it?
Pear Butter glanced quickly, nervously between the stove and Granny. I just wanted to do something nice for you. My ma and me used to poach pears this way, so I thought about trying with apples.
Pears ain't apples.
Granny pounded the floorboard hard, making Pear jump back in shock.
And apples ain't pears. You can't treat one like the other. You can't make it something it ain't. You ain't never gonna be more than what it is. Do you understand?
I understand. Pear was trembling, her eyes dewy with a wet quiver in that fluttery singer's voice of hers. Granny felt something twist in her gut as she watched the filly shrink away from her. She tried to ignore that rotten feeling, shoving it deep down, and lifted her hoof from the sizable dent she knocked in the floor. Immediately she cringed at the pain that shot through her wobbling leg, almost doubling over.
Dang.
She forced herself to stand and rested her weight upon it before turning to leave the kitchen.
Shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have.
She misjudged her own strength, resting too much on the leg, and fell forward.
This ain't going well.
Behind her, Pear Butter rose. She could hear her shifting on the floor, her hoofs clopping against the wood. Granny was about to tell the girl off, thinking she was moving to help her. Instead, she heard metal scrape on metal as she moved the pots and pans from the stove. I can't do anything for you, Pear Butter mumbled. Stupid of me to try. Granny shut her eyes, thinking about the hole in the floor and sighed.
I'm sorry for snapping. We got a way of doing things, and
I gotta learn that, right? If I'm gonna stay under your roof, be married to your son, I gotta do things your way, don't I? But you're not gonna like me anyway, so why does it matter so much? Doing the chores ain't good enough. Cooking, cleaning, trying to pick apples, that ain't good enough. Giving up my family ain't good enough, and ain't good enough for your family. Nothing I do is good enough. I'm not good enough anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter what I do. Huh? Granny heard the pot and pans fling across the floor, the noisy metallic clatter of them striking the wood. She turned and saw Pear Butter alone among a puddle of syrup, water, and half-poached apples. I don't have a daddy anymore, but I thought after the wedding, I thought that maybe I'd have a mother, that'd make everything okay. But you're never gonna see it like that. Best I can be is Bright Mac's wife. Pear. Granny gathered her legs beneath her, staying off her still throbbing front limb.
I mean, if it means that much to ya, we can always try again with the poached.
Who cares about the stupid apples? Tears streaming openly down her cheeks. I'm pregnant, Granny Smith. Granny's eyes flew open, the wind sucked out of her lungs.
Ow.
Pear, receiving no response, no spoken response, shriveled back and wept among her rapidly cooling unfinished lunch. Granny, a little numb, forced herself to move. Keeping her affected hoof off the floor, minimizing the pain, though, she still felt it throb with every step she took. She reached the stove and twisted the knobs, shutting off the gas. Then she leaned her weight against it, examining the refuse from Pear's preparation, the coals of apple pills, the soiled measuring cups, the spot spoon she'd been stirring with. She worked her jaw thoughtfully.
How long you known?
Pear Butter sniffed. I was thinking I was a couple weeks after the wedding. I didn't know till just the other day.
That's why Mac didn't want you to tag along to the bayou.
Yeah, I mean, he did, but long trips ain't best for expecting mothers, he said.
This something y'all planning for?
We've been trying about as long as we've been married. Granny could all but hear the blush in Pear Butter's voice. And we've been talking about it, so yeah, we want it. Granny exhaled. She turned away from the stove to look at Pear Butter. The girl was tracing a hoof over her belly. When she realized Granny was staring, she looked up, blinking.
You haven't heard from your pa yet, have ya?
Granny said softly. Pear shook her head. There were droplets of water and syrup in her bushy mane, and the motion flung particles of both in all directions. I write him every day, but he never writes back, and sometimes the letters just come back unopened. I wrote him as soon as I knew I was pregnant, but I don't think he'll... Granny pursed her lips and nodded, then stepped forward and knelt beside Pear, riding the upturned bucket and starting gathering the apple she spilled.
Yeah, your, poached pear recipe didn't call for flinging the apples on the ground, I imagine, she said.
Pear Butter sniffled and giggled wetly. Nah, I botched that, I think.
Well, lesson learned, I suppose.
She eyed the dent she knocked in the floor. The unfinished syrup was oozing into it. That'd take some work to fix. You know, your pa... Granny paused in her work and Pear expectantly listened.
I wasn't always Granny Smith, you know. Smith Apple, that's the name I got when I was born.
She felt the knot return to her gut.
Your pa was the first one to call me Granny. Weren't long before he and his family moved in and started with their own farm straight away. He thought it right hoot and holler to call me Granny Smith.
Said that I was sourer than a Zap apple jar full of stale granny piss. Granny looked up, aback. He liked to say that a lot to us around the dinner table. Pear Butter blushed, dipping her head. Ma, she'd yell at him for it, and I always thought it was pretty low, too.
Your ma was a decent pony. More'n your pa.
Granny shook her head.
Anywho, he started calling me that, and soon it was all any pony round town called me.
Except for...
We had this stick in the mud from out Dodge Junction way named Old Hickory Switch, and she was the one pony you couldn't get to call me that, 'cause she was
an old stuck-up biddy who just hadn't gone gray yet. Pear looked up smiling shyly. He liked to talk about her, too.
He called her that to her face once,
Granny almost added.
She didn't care for it. I don't think he ever got his jaw quite the way it used to be after that. Moral of the story is, your pa has a funny way of getting on other ponies' bad side.
Never really grew out of it. Granny coughed to clear her throat.
He ain't the most likable of ponies, and he's stubborn. Real stubborn about it.
But, I don't gotta tell you that, I guess. You don't, Pear sighed. But he's my daddy. I love him. Even if he don't love me no more. Her voice almost broke as she looked into Granny's eyes. And more than anything, I want my foal to know her family. Her whole family. I just don't know if they're going to want to know her back. Granny cracked a smile.
Hey, family.
Pear Butter blushed. We had a feeling, Bright Mac and I. First one's gonna be a girl. First one. She really was in it for the long haul, wasn't she?
Sugar Cube, I don't want to lie to you. I don't know what's going on in your pa's head. I want to tell you that he'll come around. But us old folk, we set in our ways. There just ain't no changing our minds sometimes.
Pear bit her lip, nodding. What about you? Granny swallowed and looked at Pear, and tried as hard as she could not to see Grandpa's daughter.
Your girl's gonna have a home here, and a family too.
She reached up to cup Pear Butter's teeth.
Just as sure as you do.
Pear smiled and leaned into the touch.
Bye, Pear. Or, Buttercup. That's what my son calls you, right? You mind if I?
Pear. Buttercup giggled. Please do.
Buttercup?
The name brought another smile to Granny's lips, mirroring her daughter-in-law's.
That thing Max said about expecting mothers in long trips?
Uh-huh.
That's a load of horse apples. I made the same trip when I was full to bursting with him, and I was no worse for wear. Even wrestled a chimera and won. Don't be afraid of calling him out on stuff like that, you hear?
Buttercup laughed. Whatever you say, Grant. She paused and shook her head. Whatever you say, Mom. That flickering little warmth sprung up in Granny's belly again. The word didn't quite sound natural in Buttercup's voice, but she could see herself getting used to it.
Ah, shoot,
she thought as she mused on the life quickening in Buttercup's womb.
Maybe I ought to thank Grandpa for getting used to Granny.
Maybe. Someday. That was Be Good to Your Daughters, For They Become Mothers by Posh. I would like to thank everyone who has made it to this point. This was my first attempt at voice acting. I think I did an okay Granny Smith. I apologize in advance because I know other people can do that much better. But I would like to give huge props and thanks to Boomstick Mick, who graciously provided the voice for Bright Mac in this fic. If you would like to skedaddle over to FimFiction and read his stories, that would be lovely because he is very, very good and he needs to update. I'll be patient though. His work is well worth the wait. But yes, thanks to Boomstick for being so quick with that. I know I kind of dropped that on you at the last minute, but yes, thank you. If there is any future stories that y'all would like me to read, please let me know in the comments below. I will be working on Month Macabre. I have a few stories that I have planned for October, and hopefully y'all like them, and I can keep up the schedule. So, yes. If you'd like to support me, I have a Patreon link down below. $5 tiers and up would be able to get all audio readings a day in advance. So instead of on Mondays, you'll get them on Sundays. But yes, that would be wonderful. And until next time, guys, I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you all for listening, following, and for all the feedback. It is wonderful. And until next time, guys, have a good day. Bye.